Portrait of Giovanna Tornabuoni, Domenico Ghirlandaio.
Renaissance master Domenico Ghirlandaio created one of the most beautiful portraits in 15th century Italian painting. The image of Giovanna Tornabuoni is an emblematic work and one of the collection's true gems.
The present Florentine portrait is based in the theoretical principles of classical antiquity. Giovanna Tornabuoni is captured in strict profile, one of the characteristics of the earliest portraits of the Quattrocento. The figure combines the individual features of the model with idealized proportions and features.
The curve of her forehead, the line of her nose, the angle of her chin and her slender neck are all in keeping with Renaissance ideals. Her expressionless face is inscribed with perfect proportions, which transmit a profound serenity. The idealization of the figure is also evident in the soft light that models its volumes with extreme delicacy.
In addition to the girl's physical features, the artist has included several attributes which speak to her virtue. In the austere niche in the background, he has arranged a variety of objects that allude to her pious character and her status as a cultured noblewoman. There is a brooch similar to the necklace she wears, a prayer book, a rosary with coral beads, and a small cartellino with a Latin inscription reading,
"Art, if only you could reproduce the character and the spirit, there would be no finer portrait in the world." With this epigram by Marshall, the artist expresses his intentions to capture the soul of Giovanna and make of her portrait the world's most beautiful work of art. The young woman died in childbirth just 2 years after her wedding. Her pose in profile emphasizes Giovanna's pregnant belly. Her husband, Lorenzo Tornabuoni, a great patron of the arts, commissioned this posthumous portrait with the intention of immortalizing his wife in all her glory.
Young Knight in a Landscape, Vittore Carpaccio. The large scale, the powerful presence of the knight, and the mysterious landscape surrounding him make this one of the museum's most emblematic works.
Vittore Carpaccio trained and worked in Venice, where Giorgione and Titian were beginning to produce pieces featuring vibrant colours and a magical mood. The strength of this new style stood in contrast with Carpaccio's love of detail.
The first enigma lies in the identity of this young lord. Many theories have been considered, based on the presence in the landscape of elements which are traditionally attributed to a variety of different figures.
The motto "Malo mori quam fidari" can be seen in the lower left-hand corner, and translates as "better to die than to be defiled," in the sense of being dishonoured or corrupted. Based on its presence next to an ermine, it has been suggested that this may be Ferdinand II of Aragon, who had links to the Order of the Ermine. Other experts have spoken of St. Eustace, based on the deer in the background, and still others consider this a posthumous portrait of Antonio da Montefeltro. This final hypothesis is based on the presence of a tree stump next to the knight, and the fact that full-length portraits were normally associated with funerary images. If the model was a living person, this would be the first known example of a full-length portrait in European painting.
The image shows a knight dressed for battle, but he shows no sign of fierceness. He seems about to draw his sword, but it is doubtful he will use it well, given his delicate physical state and melancholy gaze. Adding to the paradox is his hat, which would be more appropriate for the mounted knight in the background, who in turn wears a helmet. What is the artist trying to tell us? Could the answer be found in the landscape?
Animals and plants have traditionally been symbols of vice and virtue. Defending one's honour, in accordance with the motto of the Order of the Ermine on the slip of paper surrounded by a pool of water, can be related to the legend in which an ermine decided to face his hunters rather than sully himself in mud. The falcon on a branch in the upper right-hand corner symbolises courage and reason. Dogs are related to loyalty, while lilies and irises signify purity.
If we accepted the interpretation of the painting as a chivalrous fantasy, Another possible hypothesis: the result would be a work alluding to the values of an upstanding knight, and the evils which tempt him. Jesus among the Doctors, Dürer. Dürer was the ultimate representative of German Renaissance art. The artist embodied the highest of humanist ideals, defending the new image of the painter as intellectual and favouring the arrival of groundbreaking ideas from Northern Europe. In addition to painting, drawing and printmaking, he also studied the theory of painting.
His influence was clear in the most important art school of the 16th century, creating a great impression among his contemporaries and in later generations. Some of the most significant German artists of the day were trained in his workshop.
Dürer himself considered this panel to be unlike anything he had painted up to that time. Let's take a look at how he introduced this new pictorial language.
This piece brings together the ideals of perfection, beauty and harmony found in Italian art, with the characteristic elements of northern painting and the German way of representing the visible world. The original contrast between beauty and ugliness, youth and old age, is presented in a novel composition featuring a group of 7 figures.
The centre is taken up by the figure of Jesus, who is surrounded by 6 doctors of the church. His face is notable for its Italianate style, and stands in contrast with the brusque facial features of the wise men, who seem to be almost caricatures. The older men show the clear influence of Leonardo da Vinci, who the artist met while in Italy.
The focal point is centered on Jesus' hands, which, together with those of the rabbi, seem to be actively engaged in conversation. Christ uses the expressive gesture of counting on his fingers the theological arguments he uses to surprise the doctors in the temple in Jerusalem. This episode from the New Testament tells of Jesus' first public act at the age of 12.
A small inscription featuring the date and the painter's anagram sticks out from among the pages of the book in the lower left-hand corner. The date coincides with Dürer's second trip to Italy. The artist's international vocation allowed him to discover aesthetic solutions from the Renaissance in Italy and in the Netherlands, where he was able to establish contact with such notable figures as Emperor Maximilian and his grandson Charles V. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, Caravaggio.
The decrees issued by the Council of Trent for the representation of religious images in Catholic Europe stated that they had to be clear, recognizable, and soul-stirring.
2 trends were established that would follow separate paths in order to create these new images. To one side, Caravaggio, who introduced naturalism in Rome, and to the other, the Carracci family, who created and shared a new sort of classicism from their base in Bologna. These artists marked the beginning of the Baroque, a new style which would spread throughout Europe starting in 1630.
Have a look at this St. Catherine of Alexandria and notice the fundamental characteristics of the naturalist movement and its ultimate representative, Caravaggio, one of the greatest painters of all time.
The saint is shown as a lovely woman dressed in the style of a princess. Kneeling on a red damask cushion, she gazed directly out at the viewer. Next to her, we see all of the attributes of her martyrdom: the carriage wheel with sharp steel spikes, the sword used for her beheading, and the palm of martyrdom which has fallen onto the floor.
A direct source of light shines at an oblique angle, highlighting the various volumes and lending great symbolic value through the effective use of chiaroscuro. All of these elements, together with the closed space around the saint, brings great theatricality to the scene.
Chiaroscuro is a tool which accentuates certain elements of the composition through the use of strong luminous contrast. In this piece, Caravaggio uses it to focus our attention on the face and hands, the most expressive parts of the work.
In naturalism, it is also characteristic to seek out the representation of real people, turning away from the ideal. The individualized features of the model have allowed scholars to identify her as Filide Melandroni, a well-known courtesan who spent a good deal of time with Caravaggio and his circle.
In spite of developing a naturalist language that was in keeping with the decrees issued by the Council of Trent, the use of models with a questionable reputation in order to represent religious figures revealed a lack of decorum that violated counter-reformist standards. For this reason, the work of Caravaggio was not generally accepted by the Church, and only a handful of patrons were able to support his talent during his lifetime.
Caravaggio had no disciples, but his style would have a huge impact not only in Italy, but throughout Europe, giving rise to the style known as Caravaggism.